Breakout session. My name is Sabine Purewal, and I'm a Director of Pension Solutions here at the CAT Pension Plan. Today, I'll be joined by my colleague Har Sardar, also a Director of Pension Solutions, and we will be your hosts and moderators for this session. Today, we're going to be speaking with two participating plan sponsors, both of which are in different stages of their journey with CAT, and also they'll be joined by two pension industry experts. So with that, I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. Firstly, Randy Boslaw. Randy is a lawyer, trustee, and a director at Boslaw Pension and Benefits Law. Randy is joined by Lorenzo DeMarchi, Chief Investment Officer at Torstar, and CAT's own Katie McNulty, who is a manager within our Pension Solutions Group. Welcome all, and thanks so much for being here today. Note that before we begin, just one quick housekeeping item for all of our guests attending. Please feel free to submit a question through the Submit a Question feature on the left-hand side of your screen. Note that if we can't get to your question live, we will follow up with you directly shortly after the event. So with that, perhaps we can just dive right in. Randy, let's start with you. Globally, there's been a lot of focus on pensions. Recently in France, there's been some discussions around the increasing age for retirement in that country. More locally here in Canada with regards to Bill C-228, now formerly known as the Pension Protection Act. Randy, what do you see are the major challenges that Canada is facing in regards to the pension landscape, specifically for plan sponsors? And perhaps you can also touch on some of the opportunities as well.
Sure. First, thanks for inviting me to this. I was very grateful to be invited, so thanks for that. Secondly, so in terms of the response to your question, I think the challenges are, I'll start with the challenges. Coverage, we've got more than 60% of workers in this country have no coverage. We probably don't need to cover everyone. I mean, OAS and CPP are probably going to be good enough for maybe 20% of the workforce that earns below 40,000 a year. But, you know, really, we're close to 60% of the workforce with no pension coverage. Cost efficiency. We've got a system in which we have more than 16,300 registered pension plans. And it's always a surprise when I say this, but most of those plans, more than 50%, have fewer than 10 members. I don't think that's good for employers or their employees. It's not efficient. It's not cost efficient. It is good for the for-profit providers that are providing them. So the challenge, I think, is more consolidation and economies of scale to provide better pensions for Canadians. Regulatory risk. I'm a lawyer operating in the benefits and pensions field, so I deal with this all the time. But we're getting worse. We're getting more regulatory risk. You mentioned the Pension Protection Act. That's a bit of bankruptcy legislation that was passed very recently. It's a private members bill promoted by people who were affected by some bankruptcies. It effectively gives plan members a super priority in bankruptcy or insolvency proceedings. And what it really does is it effectively transfers the funding risk for a DB plan to unsecured lenders. So single employers that offer DB plans are likely to have a choice. Commit to ending or not implementing your DB plan, or don't get access to lines of credit or other unsecured financing sources, or just pay more for them, much higher interest rates. Those, I think, are the challenges. The opportunities are, let's start developing more collective plans like the CAT plan. Iceland is the #1 pension system in the world as rated by the OECD and others. It looks a lot like our system. It has something that looks like OAS. It has something that looks like CPP, and it has a private pension system that covers 95% of its workforce using 21 pension plans. They're all multi-employer plans, industry-wide type plans. They're cost efficient and they provide secure, certain benefits. We've got other examples that we could follow in terms of these types of plans. The Saskatchewan pension plan. People seem to think it's like the Canada pension plan, but for people in Saskatchewan. It's not. It's a giant group RRSP. I joined it quite a while ago. OP Trust, the CAT plan, the university's pension plan. They consolidated a bunch of single employer university plans into one plan. That is the way to go. And then also watch for development of for-profit offerings, things like Blue Peer arrangement that's out there, or I think it's called Commonwealth. I think that maybe some of the financial institutions will look at this and see maybe that's the way to go. I think there's hope, and there's lots of opportunity to address the challenges we have and improve the system.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Randy. And perhaps I could just pick your brain. You act as a lawyer for a lot of employers across Canada. What has been your experience with the onboarding process here at CAT?
Well, I acted for Lawyers Financial, which is a subsidiary of the Canadian Bar Insurance Association, to enable all people in the legal profession to get into CAT because it tends to be dominated by a bunch of small employers, including me. As even when I was a partner at one of the large firms, I was operating through a professional services corporation. And I got to tell you, I'm not the best record keeper. I am definitely not a very good secretarial assistant. But I found that the onboarding process for my little corporation with me as its employee was absolutely, it just went surprisingly well. And when I had difficulties, I just picked up the phone and called someone, and they walked me through it. They were eager to walk me through it. I didn't have to wait on hold or anything like that. They just held my hand and walked me through that onboarding process. It was great.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks for your insights there, Randy. So with that, let's jump into our first poll question. So note that the arrow on the top right-hand side of your screen will open the polling feature, and that you can use to submit your responses. So the full question is, in 2022, what percentage of private sector working Canadians were covered by a defined benefit pension? I'll give you guys about 30 seconds to respond here. Any guesses, Randy?
How many are covered by a defined benefit pension plan? I'm going to take a guess. I will take a guess. I'll say maybe 20. No, yeah. You know what? I'm not going to guess because defined benefit plans have a lot more people in them than defined contribution plans. But if I had to throw out a guess, somewhere between 25 and 45% of people who have plans are in defined benefit plans. I'll go higher. I'll go 50. 50%.
Okay, well, you were closer on the first try there. So the answer is, in fact, B, 26.6%.
Okay.
So according to Statistics Canada, between 2000 and 2022, the proportion of Canadians covered by a defined benefit plan decreased by 24%. That trend is continuing. However, CAT is on a mission to reverse that. So with that, I'll turn things over to my co-host, Horace.
Thank you very much, Sabine and Randy, for that great discussion. So as most of you know, CAT was established in 1967 as a defined benefit final average pay plan for the 24 Ontario community colleges. Realizing a problem for accruals for part-time members to provide a meaningful pension, CAT introduced what we call our DB Plus pension plan. And enabling legislation in 2019 allowed us to envelope employers from coast to coast. One of those employers, one of the first ones to join was Torstar. And today we have Lorenzo from Torstar with us, and I'm going to ask a quick question for Lorenzo. So Lorenzo, taking a trip down memory lane, can you please touch upon a few complexities of the Torstar pension plan and why CAT was a solution for you?
Sure, and thanks for the question, Horace, and good morning, everyone. So I'll start on the macro level and back up a little bit. I think, where we got to the point at Torstar where we had three big issues that we were concerned with that evolved over time. Number one, we were concerned about the risk to the business resulting from our pension plan and the size it had become. Two, we were concerned about the risk that we'd be able to continue to deliver on the pension promise to our employees, given the plan performance. And lastly, we were increasingly concerned about the level of management distraction surrounding governance and management of the pension plan at a time when management really needed to focus 100% of its energy on the business. So to give you an idea of how we got to where we were, Torstar, large media organization, the legacy media organization, labor intensive, we had 5,000 employees going back 10, 15, 20 years. We have grown over time through acquisition. And so the result of that was that we had acquired plans from other newspapers that we bought over time, which gave us a fairly complex DB plan environment. We had 8 distinct defined benefit plans within Torstar, all slightly different, all different funding. The one thing they had in common, that the contributions were heavily skewed to the employer and not the employee. So a very heavy financial burden. And these kinds of plans really reflected a time when the media business was extremely profitable. The ability to pay these kinds of benefits wasn't a burden. These plans, from a governance perspective, very complex, expensive to administer, and required quite a bit of attention from management and both the board of directors and also our pension committee. Skip ahead over time, and we found ourselves as a business, our business became smaller, the media business contracted as natural forces in the evolution of digital. And so our business started to get smaller at a time when our pension business actually began to get larger and larger because all of our legacy employees were converting into retirees. And so we started to have a mismatch in the size of our pension business relative to the size of our core business. And at that point, we made the decision to close our DB plans. We couldn't afford to continue the plans at the level of benefit that we were providing at that time, so they were closed. But the effect of that is, with most of the members now retirees as opposed to active members, we had 75 to 80% of retirees. We had to de-risk the plan and take a more conservative approach. And when you do that, asset returns are lower and your funding goes up. And the funding levels required with a big plan and the volatility compared to the size of our business, all of a sudden that cash flow swing was a real risk. As I said, gradually we got overwhelmed by the pension business and we felt we needed to address those 3 risks: funding risk, ability to deliver on our promise, and ability for management to focus on the business at a time that, which was critical given the level of transformation we were going through. Those are the situations that really compelled us to seek out and speak to Derek and the folks at CAT about CAT as a possible solution for us.
Thank you for that, Lorenzo. I was going to ask you about success factors, but I think you've already covered them. So I'll save some time here and introduce another panel member who's a little late joining. So if we can have Rick Arsenault on the screen, then I can just quickly introduce. Welcome, Rick. Thank you for joining us. Rick is the Chief Financial and Administrative Officer at the George Hull Center. And I'm going to take this opportunity to use a stat that we have from George Hull, where the average active population in the CAT plan is in their mid-30s. And that brings me to our next poll question. And so true or false this time. And I don't want to age myself, but true or false, millennials have less interest in pension plans than older generations. We'll give you about 10 to 20 seconds to answer that.
I lost the sound. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Rick, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Okay. I'm just going to answer the question that I think you said. We joined in July of 2021. And the reason why we joined is that we were a single employer defined benefit plan and we had valuations due every 3 years and they were killing us. We were paying about $1 million a year. And just to put that in context, George Hull is a relatively medium-sized children's mental health center with a budget of about 12 million. And our pension cost, special payments for insolvency, was around $1 million a year. So CAT came along and offered us to join, and we did a valuation and we ponied up the amount that we had to put into the CAT plan to balance off, and that's how we moved forward into the CAT plan. So it's been very successful from July of 2021.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rick, on that. So I was heading to a poll question, and the poll question was true or false. Do millennials have less interest in pension plans than older generations, given that the George Hull population is vastly millennials? All right.
I'm
So
just
most
waiting
of
for the question to be posted into the chat because I can't hear anything for some reason. We're pulling up a poll question now.
and I guess everybody else can hear. So I will speak to that. Everybody mostly got it right. So the answer is false. In fact, according to Hoop's 2022 retirement survey, 60% of workers under the age of 35 would sacrifice pay for a better pension. In fact, 80% of those workers would actually change jobs for better pension coverage as well. So the slide that you see in front of you on the right-hand box, you can see some more stats from the same study. And those stats all point towards the fact that pension coverage actually is pretty important to millennials, regardless of popular belief. Awesome. Since Rick can't hear me, I'm going to ask Lindsay to type the next question I have for Rick. And that would be great. I apologize for our virtual IT issues, but that's the world that we live in. And the question is, 2 years in, what kind of impact has DB Plus had on George Hull Center?
So the impact on the DB plan for us, number one, is that it's fantastic for retention. Number two is that because of the switchover and the amount of help that CAT helped us with by all the voting, people were more aware of the pension that we were offering. So that was very helpful for us as well. And we don't have any insolvency payments anymore, which is fantastic. So it's way easier for budgeting. And those are the main things that for George Hull, for the staff and for the employer moving forward with CAT. It's been a godsend.
Thank you so much for that, Rick. And I don't know if you can hear my thank you. I doubt it. So I'm just going to type it and take this opportunity to turn it right back to my presenter here. Sabine, take us away.
Great, thanks, Horace. I'm now joined by my colleague, Katie McNulty, a manager at Pension Solutions here at CAT. Katie, now that you've heard a lot about why employers are joining CAT at such a rapid rate, I believe the current stat is that we're adding 3 new employers every 5 business days. In your discussions, what are you hearing from organizations? What's keeping the C-suite up at night?
Thanks very much for the question, Sabine. And I'll start off by thanking everyone for taking the time to attend today. So as you know, our team is responsible for responding to organizations and their representatives that are interested in joining CAT Pension Plan. And what we're predominantly hearing from those leaders is they want to do the right thing. Cost certainty is needed, and employee engagement is very important, as you've already heard from Lorenzo, Randy, and Rick. When it comes to employers wanting to do the right thing, employees also want the employer to do the right thing. Employees want what is fair, what is equitable. I can give you an example. So I was on a flight the other day, and I got to go up into the cockpit, and I was talking to the pilots, and pensions came up. And so the first pilot proudly shared with me that they participate in a defined benefit pension plan. So they have that lifetime retirement income, and they're quite proud of it. And then when I asked the first officer if they did as well, they said that they didn't, that they participated in something subpar. So pension envy is real. I see it all the time. And there actually used to be, or it made sense that there were these 2-tier offerings, or that organizations were trying to extinguish DB plans altogether because of the cost, the liability. which brings me to my second point, cost certainty. So with DB Plus, there's fixed cost. We're not charging fees, we're not charging commissions, which is absolutely aligned with our not-for-profit model. But if you're really focusing on the bottom line, if that's such a concern, lower levels of employee engagement have been proven to drop productivity, which is absolutely going to cause an overall loss for organizations. So that brings me to my third point of employee engagement, because attraction and retention is so important right now in this competitive labor market that we're experiencing. I'll give you two more examples. So I was talking to a CHRO a couple of months ago, and they came to us because they're going through the interview process where they're screening candidates. And guess what's happening? The environment is changing, and the candidates, they're screening back. So they're having these initial conversations, and one of the first questions they're being asked is, do you offer a pension plan? And they didn't, so that's why they came to us. Then we had another organization that was so bold that they actually put on their job posting that they already offered our pension plan because they needed that differentiator when competing against their competitors side by side with job postings. They get it. They know that employees value that lifetime retirement income. So I'd say ultimately what's keeping leaders up at night, as you've heard earlier from Lorenzo, Randy, and Rick, they want to do what is the right thing. They want cost certainty. Employee engagement is oh so important. And thankfully, DB Plus is the solution to those problems.
That's fantastic, Katie. Thanks for your insights on that. And that's a great segue into our last poll question. So in a survey of top global CEOs, what has emerged as their biggest concern? Again, what's keeping the C-suite up at night?
You mean other than caffeine, right?
That's correct, yeah. We'll give it a few seconds here for the poll results to come in.
I'm really curious to see what the polls show.
Any guesses while we're waiting, Katie?
I'll just have to go with the three ones I've already listed. I'm wondering if there are any in addition to that.
Yeah, I think there's probably a common theme reoccurring here. So we'll give it a few more. Oh, there we go. So attracting and retaining top talent, that is likely a huge concern, but the answer is in fact B. It may come as a surprise, but CEOs are highly aware of the race for talent and cognizant of the fact that talent management has a direct impact to the bottom line, and it's closely linked to the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague, Horace.
Thank you so much, Sabine. We're doing fantastic for time. So I'm going to actually call upon Randy for a question. And this one's a bit close to my heart because I was just at another law firm's presentation, which was talking about Bill 228 and what it means to different structures of DB plans in the Canadian landscape. So Randy, can you please talk a little about how Bill 228 affects single employer pension plans versus MEPs versus JSPPs?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say this about the Pension Protection Act. It was a private member's bill. It's not the best piece of drafting I have seen with legislation. It basically amends, as I said before, the bankruptcy and insolvency legislation to protect employees who have earned pensions and then their companies go bankrupt, but the plan isn't fully funding, so that it's fully funded, so they take a hit. My experience has been in this area has been I was the lead lawyer acting for the Nortel pension plan administrator to collect assets. I can tell you that we had to cut benefits by almost a third as a result of the bankruptcy, but then we restored almost for most employees, about 98%. For some of the senior executives and others who had very generous benefits, it's more like 80%. And I think some of those are behind this bill. But the way, and I mentioned that what it does do is it transfers the funding risk onto its unsecured lenders. Now, this is for single employers. If you've got a single employer plan where you as the employer are responsible for that funding, and your commitment is to fund whatever it takes to fund it up, you are at risk from this legislation. If, on the other hand, if you're in a multi-employer arrangement like CAT, where if the plan were to wind up in full, CAT does have the ability to reduce benefits so that the amount of the liability is equal to the amount of the assets, the worst possible case scenario. So you as an employer have none of this risk, and you can safely say to your lenders and others, well, my commitment here is a fixed contribution, just as it would be in a defined contribution plan or a group RFP. I have that is my financial commitment. I do not have this make-up funding liability that I would have if I was a single employer providing a DB pension plan.
Yeah, thank you for that, Randy. And I just want to clarify that the way that our structure is, which I like to, as a ballroom dancer, like to call it a dance between asset and liabilities in our funding policy, right? So we manage our funded status based on our, I'd call it the state-of-the-art funding policy, which ensures that the CAT pension plan is going to be fully funded with a 99% confidence for the next few decades, right? So thanks for that clarification. So we are over 300 employers strong as of today. We are over 400 staff members strong today. With a lot of growth on the horizon, and our HR folks with Julie's leadership is working hard. So yes, we do have all the resources, and we're very excited about the future with all the different avenues that CAT is going to be using to provide retirement security across our great nation, right? So thank you for that, Randy. I will call upon my colleague, Katie McNulty, for the next question, please. Thank you, Katie. Given that the panel is what in CAT's timeline legacy folks, because they've been with us for over 2 or 3 years now, we have been doing quite a few innovative additions to our plan design. And I did want today, Katie, for your expertise on how we've included some flexibility options on DB Plus to make it more attractive for employers to literally be able to lift and shift their DC type plans if they have to. But if you can please touch upon a few of the flexibility items that CAT has put in place in our plan design.
Absolutely, Horace. So DB Plus is incredibly flexible in its offering. And so if we go back to that story about the 2 pilots on the flight I was on, and how one had a DB pension and the other did not, and there was serious tension there. I don't think it was a coincidence also that it was one of the most turbulent flights I've ever been on. But that pension envy, that tension, it can be so easily resolved if they were to come to CAT. I'll give you an example, just demonstrating the flexibility that we offer. I worked with this one group. It had unionized employees involved, so that makes things a little more complicated, and a couple of different arrangements. When they originally decided to join CAT, we had different terms. And so they were coming in to CAT with a non-contributory RRSP. So the employees didn't contribute anything to this offering, and the employer was asking them to get up to our 5% minimum at the time. So that is a big jump. The employer and we and the union also felt that maybe they needed time to adjust to that. So we came up with a phase-in option where they could slowly adjust to the ultimate rate over several years, and just demonstrating to the members that it only cost them a couple of cups of coffee off of their paycheck, but they would get this great ultimate value in retirement. It really struck a chord with them when we went and presented this information. We thought that they would actually put up a guard or resist joining and contributing 5% when they were contributing nothing at all, but they absolutely saw the value in it. And so the members, they asked, how do we just contribute as much as possible as soon as possible? So then we came up with the ability for them to elect what they wanted to do upon joining. So they could go in through the phase-in option, or they could elect to go to the ultimate rate immediately. And guess what? The majority of them chose the ultimate rate. So my point is that we're constantly changing our flexibility. I could really go on and on about the different types of flexibility we offer, but I'll just say when I started working with CAT a few years ago, with these fixed terms, we took them out to market and the market responded and we listened and we adapted accordingly. So we are constantly changing our terms. And as long as we're abiding by legislation and the regulations, as long as we're abiding by the rules, the sky's the limit. So it's wonderful to be working at an organization that has such vision and adaptability, and the fact that we're constantly innovating. Maybe I'll end it with a little bit of a cliffhanger and say that there's even more exciting innovation coming. So how about everyone stay tuned?
Thank you so much for that, Katie. And honestly, they say, how do you feel like when you wake up on Monday morning to go to work, and with all this excitement, it does not feel like work at all, right? So it's, I don't know, I tell people I'm retired and I don't have a DB, I'm not drawing a DB pension yet, but it feels like being retired.
I have an inside joke with some of our colleagues here, TGIM.
Awesome. So if we can have the entire panel on the screen here to open the floor up to Randy, Lorenzo, and Sabine to add anything else that they want. We do have another 5 minutes or so to go. Yes, Lorenzo, please go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I'd just like to mention as well, just as a post-implementation and how it's been received by our employees, there's two things that I think they really, really value. Number one, with the CAT plan, the service to them as members from the CAT customer service people was a step function better than what we had before. So all of a sudden they found easier to get their questions answered, more timely, all of that stuff. And the other thing that they found very confidence inducing was the level of transparency that they had on the reporting of the health of the CAT plan. So the single employer plan, we would communicate, but our ability to communicate was much more limited. The quality and the transparency of the information that members see today about the health of the plan, the funding levels, the stages of funding, et cetera, is as a package. I would say our employees feel better about the service they get and more confidence about the pension promise today than they ever have. And so hats off to the folks at CAT. It's been a really fantastic experience for our members from that point of view.
It's so good to hear you can focus on your business.
That's amazing. And that's one of our pillars as well, that we want employers to concentrate on the business of what they're in, as opposed to the business of running a pension plan. And it's interesting, again, I go back to the law firm that I was at yesterday. One of their partner goes that, in our opinion, if a pension plan doesn't have $500 million of assets, they shouldn't be running a pension plan, right? And that makes sense from an aspect of administrative costs of running a plan, or the legal filings and so on and so forth. So from a fiduciary standpoint of using the most efficient use of member money, I kind of tend to agree with that partner lawyer. So at this point, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll just tell you from our point of view, we had $1 billion plan, and I don't think we had the sufficient scale to be efficient. Like even at $1 billion, it just doesn't make financial sense.
Thank you for that, Lorenzo. So does anybody have anything else on the panel before I turn it over to Sabine for our closing remarks?
Sure. I'll just make one comment on how much of a better bang for the buck CAT is compared to single employer arrangements, or for that matter, multi-employer defined contribution arrangements. There's a really good paper you can Google called Better Bang for the Buck that has been revised, I think, at least 3 times coming out of the United States, which gives a nice summary of the evidence for the fact that a defined benefit pension plan provides approximately twice as much lifetime retirement income as the average defined contribution plan. So it is a very, very good deal. And a lot of that comes from exactly the points that Lorenzo and others were making, which is the pooling of investment risk, the pooling of administrative and operational work and costs, more in-house expertise to avoid the regulatory risks I mentioned earlier. You don't need outside actuaries or lawyers very much. I like to say very much. Administrative efficiency, and it's not for profit.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's going to be better. You save 1% in fees every year. That's equivalent to I don't know what over the lifetime of a pension, probably 25% of the accrual of a pension over the lifetime of the average worker that's in it. And I know there's UK evidence that to support that as well. It's just a better deal. It really is a better bang for the buck and less risky.
Randy, do you have the T-shirt which says "Pensions for Everyone"? If not, we need to sign you up for it.
I have at least one, maybe 2.
If you need another one, we can make that happen as well.
I'm happy to wear it.
Awesome. Thanks. Take us away, Sabine.
No, that's great. We've got about 1 minute left here, so I just want to extend again a huge thank you to Randy, Rick, Lorenzo, and of course Katie for joining the panel today. We're looking forward to continuing this conversation. It was very insightful, and we hope to continue providing DB pension coverage from coast to coast. So with that, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.